In this video, we're going to look at my last over-the-board game. It's a 60 plus 30 time control against Kevin Gausted, and we just played recently with the colors reversed. In this game, Kevin plays e4, I'm playing the black pieces, and I went with the Caro-Kann. The last couple times we've played, it was a Sicilian Taimanov, but I really wanted to try a Caro-Kann this time because we have the ChessGoals Caro-Kann course, and I was thinking about putting it into a video and trying to just make my Caro-Kann even better. So he plays d4, d5, and Kevin here chooses the exchange variation. I thought one line he might consider is the Panov, but he decided to play bishop to d3. And he told me after the game that he actually thought I might play the Caro, so he did a little bit of prep in this line himself. So we both had prepared a little bit in the Caro-Kann leading up to this game. He plays c3, standard book move. And here our Caro-Kann course recommends queen to c7. And what this does is it prevents the c1 bishop from easily developing out to f4 because our queen defends f4. So Kevin plays knight f3. And I think this line should be one of the better lines for black actually because of this move bishop to g4. It's a nice way to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain. So this pawn will be on e6 eventually. All of these pawns are on light squares. We get the bishop outside of the pawn chain. Nice easy development, and it pins the f3 knight to the queen. So we see castle by white, pawn to e6, and now my plan is to play bishop to d6, and then most likely knight to e7, possibly knight to f6. h3, and here I don't want to take because that'll give white the bishop pair, and I don't really have any compensation for the bishop pair in this position. The only time in our course we really like to take on f3 is when there's no c-pawn defending d4. So that'd be like in the advanced variation, picture this pawn out on e5. Then we would probably want to play bishop takes f3 because the d4 pawn is a big weakness. But with this pawn on c3 defending d4, remember that difference, we don't want to take on f3. And this is something that I've seen players make a mistake a few different times where they'll take on f3, but the d4 pawn is well defended, so we don't want to do that. Bishop back to h5, rook e1, bishop to d6. So I'm following the standard setup from the repertoire course. Bishop to e3, knight e7. Now you might be wondering why knight e7 and not knight to f6. The reason for this is oftentimes we'll end up playing f6 and e5 after getting castled and go for the big center. But there's definitely nothing wrong with playing knight to f6. It's a very playable move. And maybe here you could go for the minority attack with a6 and b5. But you probably won't be playing for that center break anymore. So knight e7 with the central break idea coming up. Knight b to d2. Now here is an interesting position because I know there's a line after castle where white can play bishop takes h7 check. And this actually blunders the pawn. I can't take back because of knight g5 check, and the queen is hitting this bishop on h5. King g6 doesn't help because g4 and the bishop is still trapped. White is very close to winning, if not winning this position already. So I took the time here to play h6. This is the correct move. Kevin plays a3. Now, this is the first critical moment for myself in the game. I know in the past when I've played the Caro-Kann, I've struggled with playing positions that I feel are equal against lower rated players. And I was even thinking about that in this position. I knew the line was supposed to be castle, but in my mind I wasn't sure what happened after castle c4. I wasn't very confident in this position. But if you look at it more closely, it's a pretty simple solution. D takes c4, and what is white going to do? Knight takes c4. Now you can develop a rook to d8 or play a bishop to f4. There's this isolated pawn for white in combination with that bishop pinned. It's a very comfortable game for black. Probably half a pawn advantage, maybe up to a pawn advantage, depending on what white does. But for some reason I wasn't feeling confident in this and I overreacted. I played pawn to f5. So really I need to just castle, and maybe Kevin won't even play c4 here. Maybe he'd play a move like b4. There's no guarantee that c4 is coming, but I definitely don't need to play f5. That's a big learning point from this game. Don't overreact with your pawns. I've done it many times in the past. I knew it was a problem and I still did it again. And that's why this video is called Caro-Kann Pawns Gone Wild. This is a tendency that I have to overextend in the Caro-Kann with the pawns, and I did it again. Now Kevin played g4, and this move took me by surprise. And at this point, actually my calculation failed me. I really should have played f takes g4. What I didn't like about it is knight to h4, but this is actually a very good position for black, and it gives me the kingside attack that I wanted, because now you can play, I mean, even queenside castle here is a good move, but bishop to h2 check is really strong, followed by g5, hitting this knight. And if h takes g4, trying to win the bishop, now drop this back. When this knight retreats, you can play a move like bishop to f4, and what's going to happen is this king is going to castle on the queen side, the rook will be on d8 and then come over to g8, h5 is going to be played, and that white king is wide open. This is a really strong attack, very close to winning. But in the game, for some reason, I was a bit afraid of this line. I actually missed this idea after f takes g, knight h4. I missed this idea of playing bishop to h2 check followed by g5. I kind of thought that here I would have to just do something like castle, h takes g, and retreat the bishop somewhere. And I wasn't too happy with this position, maybe even g5 is a move. I thought maybe white has an attack. And yeah, I think Stockfish is confirming this. White probably has an advantage at this point. So I missed the idea bishop h2 and g5, and that's one that goes back to calculation. That's one of my weaknesses that I've been finding. I need to calculate more concretely. And here, this was my chance to get a really good position on only move 13. So here Kevin played g takes f5. And oftentimes mistakes come in pairs. I made another small mistake here. E takes, actually, smaller mistake than the first one. The first one was a big mistake. I played e takes f5. And what I didn't appreciate was just how strong knight e5 was. So again, goes back to calculation. I thought I could safely get away with winning this pawn, but when I started looking at all the variations, the problem is there's going to be a bishop check on the diagonal, or a queen check on the diagonal. And queen a4 check is probably the strongest. I cannot safely block this. That's the problem. If the knight moves, the f-pawn drops. If the queen moves, the bishop is going to run into problems. Like let's say queen c6, bishop to b5. If queen d7, still bishop to b5. After knight c6, this bishop is going to move, and the bishop on e5 is pinned by the rook. So white's completely winning here. So after queen a4 check, the only thing you can really do is move the king. Knight c6 also doesn't work because of f4, and once this bishop moves out of the way, there's a discovered attack. Bishop b6 winning the queen. Not a good position at all. So once I saw knight e5, I knew I was already kind of scrambling in this position. So I went from having a chance to be really close to winning to now on a worse side of this tactical position with my king stuck in the center. Why is my king in the center? Because combination, pawns gone wild, and poor calculation on my part. So what I should have done instead of e takes f5 is probably queenside castle right here. Give up a pawn, knowing that I get a nice attack. And this kind of would fit the style of the game that I've played so far. But instead I chose e takes f5. Alright, so knight e5. Here I decided to take with the bishop. And after d takes e, instead of trying to win the pawn with queen takes e5, which looks very dangerous, bishop to c5 could be played. Everything's tied down. I decided to queenside castle here. And I think it was a good practical choice. This is going to allow me to attack kingside. Bishop to d4 was played, and I blockaded this pawn. Queen to a4, and here this a7 pawn is being attacked twice, so I took the time to play king to b8. And oftentimes when you queenside castle, the king is actually safer when you get to move it over to b8 or b1. So I was happy with this move. Bishop to c5, threatening bishop to d6, pinning the queen to the king. But I had a nice reply, knight c8. So this knight not only guards this square, but also guards a7. So I feel like the last couple moves for white were creating simple threats, and I was able to improve my position while defending each threat. So I think a couple moves ago white had a larger advantage, whereas now it's getting pretty close to equal. And then here there was a blunder. Bishop to d4. The reason this is a blunder is because I can play pawn to f4, and all of a sudden my attack is coming to life very quickly, and white hasn't made much progress on the counterattack on the queen side. So white played bishop to f1, and here I played g5. And I was pretty happy with how I played the rest of the game. So there was just the shakiness in the opening, a couple moves, probably 3 different moves there that were critical. But at this point, I felt very good about how this attack unfolded, and I'll show you what happened. b4, and here I played pawn to g4, trying to open up this g file. b5 was played, hitting my knight, and I'd calculated that it's okay if this knight's attacked because I could always swap on d4 and then continue the attack on the king side. C takes d, and now I played g takes h, getting ready to bring a rook or the queen to the g file. Rook c1, queen g7 check. I thought during the game h2 check was pretty interesting. If king takes h2, that king is kind of trapped out there on the h file, and maybe I could get a combination of like queen coming to h, rook coming to g, try to checkmate that way. But I think the way I played it was also good. Queen g7 check. King h2, rook h to g8. This is threatening queen g1 mate. And then knight f3 was played. My computer was being slow. Knight to b6. The reason I played this is because I wanted to have the option of playing rook to c8 if that queen was on the c file. So if the queen goes to c2, I would consider rook c8 right away. Queen d1 was played, and now I had this idea of putting my queen on the h file, like queen on h5, maybe bishop on g4. So I started with queen to g6. And the nice thing about this position is white's attack is coming very slowly, so I actually have quite a bit of time to keep improving my attack on the king side. Rook c3 was played. Nice defensive idea. Coming over to the h-pawn. I played queen to h5. And a cool threat that I have coming up is going to be doubling the rooks on the g file if I'm given the option, because I can consider rook g2 check in some cases, and if bishop takes, pawn takes check with the other rook coming over, that could be very strong. So that's why I kind of like this combination of queen on h5 with the rook on the g file. Knight g1 was played, and now I play bishop to g4, essentially forcing what I thought during the game f3. The engine does say that white could get away with playing queen to e1 or queen to c1 is a stronger move. But let's say queen to e1, for example. I think now I could bring the knight in, knight to c4. Or maybe what I should have done, actually. Yeah, even stronger here would be rook to g4. Trying to double the rooks on the g file and preventing this queen trade at the same time. Now you might be wondering, well, can white take this h3 pawn? There's 3 different options here. If rook takes, I can drop the queen back, hitting the knight. And if the knight moves, now I have rook g8, and this is where the sacrifice is about to happen, followed by a checkmate. And I can even envision a queen sacrifice here. Like, let's just say queen d3. There's check, check, queen sack, and mate with the 2 rooks. That's a cool checkmate. So I think rook g4 would have been the way to go. If bishop takes h3, I can again stack the rooks on the g file, and this is threatening rook g2 check right away. Yeah, bishop g4, not the most accurate, but it did provoke f3, which happened in the game. I brought the bishop back to f5, and now I finally started stacking the rooks. Queen f2 and rook to g2 check. White resigned at this point. So, pretty good game overall, but I wasn't happy with that stretch kind of in the early middle game. And I think it starts with f5, And one thing I started doing with the Caro-Kann repertoire is I'm adding stockfish evaluations to the end of every position, as well as a description of why the evaluation is what it is. So talking about the imbalances that create that eval. And I think what that'll do is it'll help boost not only my own confidence, but purchasers of the Caro-Kann course, where you know, okay, I'm actually up half a pawn in this position. Knowing that I'm up half a pawn in this position, I'm not afraid to play a quiet move like castling, and maybe this bishop comes back to g6. Minority attack could still happen, and I have a good bishop on d6, opposite color of the pawns. So to help myself with these types of moves, that's what I'm doing, adding to the course. And 2 moves in a row, bishop to f7 and e takes f5. I need to really work on calculation. It's happening game after game. In these slow games, I'm making calculation errors. And I don't know how much of that is being a little bit rusty, because I feel like my calculation used to be a bit better than it has been as of late. But it might also just be laziness in a way. Like I haven't been used to playing the slow classical games, and sometimes it's hard to get your brain firing for the whole 3-4 hours, however long the game takes. These were up to 3 hours, which shouldn't be terribly long, but I think it's something where you have to train for it. You have to train your brain to really think hard and think accurately. So those are my big takeaways. Same things are recurring, and that's one of the nice things about takeaways. You start to notice these trends in your own game, and you can figure out ways to improve your game based on those trends. So hopefully this video helped you learn something from the Caro-Kann Exchange variation, but also kind of how to think about takeaways and improve your own chess. All right, thanks for watching, and if you're interested in the Caro-Kann course or any other courses, check out the links in the description below, and I'll put a playlist above for the Caro-Kann. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.